It's Ray Grant. It's Friday, November 10th, 2023. It is 3:09 a.m. here in Pittsburgh. This is episode 3 of my Zodiac Killer walkthroughs. Today I will be talking about the murder of Darlene Ferrin in Blue Rock Springs Park. As I said in my previous video, I'm not going to do a precise timeline for this because I don't think it's necessary. The event was more of a hit and run than it was a sequence of events. So I'm just going to talk about various topics involved with the Blue Rock Springs Park attack. The first of which is the selection of the victim, Darlene Ferrin. I believe that the Zodiac killers chose victims, that they actually made a list of potential victims prior to beginning the Zodiac Killer Project. That if you look at the what is usually called the Mikado letter of July 26, 1970, the writer of the letter quotes, I think it's actually the Groucho Marx version of the patter song from the Mikado, where the Lord High Executioner says, "I have a little list. I have a little list of people who won't be missed." In so many words. And that's essentially the Zodiac killers were telling the public that that's what they were doing. In other words, there was a potential list of victims for each event, and which victim was chosen came down to happenstance. Who was available, who was in the at least in a general sense in the right place at the right time. And what's unusual about the Darlene Ferrin murder is that it's a break from the other canonical crimes, and I'm including the Cherry Bates murder with that. If you look at the victims in the canonical crimes plus the Cherry Bates murder, they are all academically involved. In other words, Cherry Bates was a student at Riverside City College. She was going to college. She wanted to be an airline stewardess, but she was attending a college at the time of her death. David Faraday wanted to be a teacher. He was a senior honor student at Vallejo High School, and since he wanted to be a teacher, he was going to go on to college. The Betty Lou Jensen was going for some sort of art scholarship. She was looking to get that. I assume she wanted to go to college as well. If you for a minute bypass Darlene Ferrin, look at the two victims at Lake Berryessa. Brian Hartnell was a student at Pacific Union College, which was for Seventh-day Adventists. Cecilia Shepard was also a student at that college. That's how she knew Brian. But she was in the process of transferring to UC Riverside, where she wanted to, I think, go for an advanced degree in music. And Paul Stein, who is the victim in Presidio Heights, was going for his PhD in English at San Francisco State University in San Francisco. So all of the canonical victims, plus Cherry Bates, were all involved in academic activities, with the exception of Darlene Ferrin. So the question becomes, why was if the academic activities of the victims mattered, why was Darlene Ferrin the exception? And is that a coincidence, or is there some significance to it? In the case of the two Vallejo murders, you had the people that the two victims who I believe were the actual targets of the Zodiacs were David Faraday and Darlene Ferrin. The first thing you will notice about those two is that they have the same initials. They are both DFs. D is the fourth letter of the alphabet. F is the sixth letter. It's to evoke the number 46, which we will refer to in the future when we talk about the Zodiac project itself. But the two crimes in Vallejo, Lake Herman Road, December 20th, 1968, and the Blue Rock Springs Park murder, which was actually took place July 5th, well, July 4th and 5th, 1969, were intended to be mirror images of each other. And we see that in the fact that the two main victims, David and Darlene, had the same initials. Also, if you look at the Zodiac Killer cover letters of July 31st, 1969, you will note that when he cites details from the crime scenes, he does it chronologically. He first cites Christmas, last Christmas, and then he cites July 4th or 4th July. But when this is the Zodiac speaking letter comes in August, early August of 1969, and he again cites even more details from the two crimes, he does it in reverse order. He mentions first the July 4th killing, and then mentions the Christmas. In other words, the order of the details of the crimes was reversed. And the reason for this is that they are trying to get across the idea that the two crimes were essentially the same. They were essentially making the same point with the Lake Herman Road murders as they made with the Blue Rock Springs murder. And so the two crimes are mirror images of each other. They were both on the north leg of the Mount Diablo Radian. David and Darlene, their names both made the Zodiac killers were choosing people because of their names, because of properties that their names had. U Penn worked for the initially for the California Highway Patrol, and then he went to work for the Attorney General's office, the Department of the DOJ in California. He had access to all the state databases. He was a statistician for those two offices, so he had access to vehicle registration. He had access to driver's license information. So if he were looking for specific properties in people's names, it would be fairly easy for him to find those in the state databases. So he, I believe, chose victims with, in the case of Darlene Ferrin and David Faraday and Darlene Ferrin, both names convert to the word Easter on in a redivided Morse code. Okay, and we will see this pattern in other things that the Zodiac killers did. But the point was, the two targeted victims were David and Darlene. David and Darlene both had the same initials, but there was one significant difference between the two, which is that David was academically involved and Darlene wasn't. Darlene was more of a street person. She was somebody who worked at a Waffle House and was the only one of the Zodiac victims who could be described as a street person, as someone who was, just familiar with your everyday, people on the street. And the question becomes, why is Darlene in there among the other academically involved people? And the answer to that is because the Zodiacs had a list of victims. That means that by by definition, if you make a list of people for just about any category, some of the people are going to be a higher priority than others are. And Darlene, in my opinion, would have been a relatively low priority. And the reason for this is that what the Zodiac killers wanted was to commit standard types of murders. They wanted to commit conventional murders. The Cherry Bates murder could be looked at as a co-ed murder. The two Vallejo crimes, Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs Park, could be considered Lover's Lane murders. The Lake Berryessa murder kind of stands on its own, so we will push that aside for a moment. The Presidio Heights murder was a cabbie murder, and cabbie murders have been cited on various Zodiac killer message boards as being when a cabbie is shot. A lot of people will say, I think Ray Davis is an example. Oh, here's another possible victim of the Zodiac killer because it's a cabbie who got shot. So, what was the idea behind committing conventional murders? The idea was that if you have a list of victims and you're trying to construct this this puzzle called the Zodiac Project, occasionally in the committing of those murders, something is going to go wrong. Okay, it's I think Ross Garacci on one of his videos pointed out that the idea of the victims' names having significance isn't new. It's you can see it in, for example, the Agatha Christie's novel from 100 years ago, The ABC Murders, where an apparent serial killer is killing people in alphabetical order. So he kills someone whose name starts with the letter A, then someone whose name starts with the letter B, then someone whose name starts with the letter C, and so forth. The idea being that, spoiler alert, if you haven't read the book and you want to read it, then mute my next 30 seconds or so here. But the idea being that the killer wants to kill a particular person, and that person's name begins with C. So he sets up a serial killer. He creates a serial killer that is apparently killing people by in alphabetical order, and that covers up the fact that there was a different motive for killing the person whose name begins with C. Okay, so in the case of the Zodiac Project, Darlene Ferrin's name contained the word Easter, which made her a potential victim in Vallejo. The other real positive about Darlene Ferrin is that she apparently frequented a place, the Blue Rock Springs Park parking lot, that was on or very close to the north leg of the Mount Diablo Radiant. Okay, so she was, in terms of opportunity, a very good a victim that they would want to kill. The problem with killing Darlene Ferrin is that because Darlene was familiar with street people, that meant that if once Darlene Ferrin became a Zodiac killer victim, that people that she actually knew would become suspects. Okay, which would not happen if, for example, at Lake Herman Road, there weren't any obvious suspects that would have some reason to kill David and Betty Lou. Okay, so it was believable that they were killed by this random serial killer, the Zodiac killer. Same thing with Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. Same thing, and once he revealed himself, the same thing with Paul Stein. That would probably have been true of Sherry Bates as well. Unfortunately, the Riverside PD became obsessed with this idea that Bob Barnett was the killer, and they just wouldn't let that go, no matter how many reasons there were to let it go. That his fingerprints didn't match what was left on the car, his mitochondrial DNA didn't match what was found stuck to her thumb. Didn't matter. They still believe that. So but the idea being that they're creating this puzzle where the names of the victims are important, and they're choosing particular victims because of their availability, basically at given times. And the advantage to doing to having multiple victims, having a list of victims, and particularly to doing conventional crimes, is that if they do a conventional crime and then they're stuck with the problem of not being able to claim that crime for one reason or another, it looks like a conventional murder. So people don't even suspect that it's a Zodiac murder. For example, if there was a cabbie murder or a Lover's Lane murder or a co-ed murder in the general time vicinity of these other murders, people wouldn't necessarily attribute it to the Zodiac killer because the Zodiac killer hadn't claimed those specific murders. But what if the Zodiacs actually did commit the murder? In other words, let's assume for a moment that you're on Lake Herman Road and you're in the process of killing David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, and multiple people are in the turnout. Either two or three, probably three Zodiac killers. You, Penn, Michael O'Hare, and Gareth Penn are all three of them are actually in the turnout, and James Owen drives by a minute earlier than he actually did, or a minute later. Instead of driving by at 11:09 p.m., he drives by at 11:10 p.m. and he sees multiple people in the turnout shooting in the process of killing David and Betty Lou. Excuse me. Obviously, he would then accelerate onto, you know, further down Lake Herman Road. He wouldn't I don't think he would hang around. Okay. But the problem from their standpoint, if Stella Medeiros, instead of arriving at 11:14:30, had arrived a minute earlier, the problem from the standpoint of the Zodiac killers is now you have witnesses who have seen more than one Zodiac killer. And if the Zodiacs claim that as a Zodiac murder, then any notion that the Zodiac killer is just a sad little man, a single killer, goes out the window. So that means that yes, they've killed David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, but they can't claim that murder as the Zodiac. So you wouldn't have had the cover letters for the Z408 on July 31st, 1969, because they couldn't claim those murders. So as a result of that, it's another reason why the Zodiacs didn't communicate after Lake Herman Road, because they had to be absolutely sure that no witnesses saw more than one person. And I'm not sure exactly how close they came to that. They were presumably in the turnout when Robert Conley, not William Conley, Robert Conley and Frank Gasser passed the turnout on their way to going home circa 11:05 p.m. They were presumably in the turnout when James Owen passed circa 11:09 p.m. and I assume that they had ducked their heads down. But they wouldn't have known that absolutely that they weren't seen. So they had to wait. They couldn't make any phone calls that night. The other reason they wouldn't make a phone call is that they were going to commit the Darlene Ferrin commit a murder later on, also in Vallejo, also along the north leg of the Mount Diablo Radian. And as a result of that, you don't want to give the police the impression that there's a maniac on the loose and thereby increase police presence on the road. Okay, so essentially, what you have is you have the Zodiac killers with a list of victims, and some of them are a higher priority than others. My guess is that there was at least one other victim in Vallejo that the Zodiac killers had in mind the night of July 4th. However, that victim wasn't available, and Darlene Ferrin was. This raises a couple of other issues. Well, here's the problem with Darlene Ferrin. If Darlene Ferrin is recognized as a Zodiac killer victim, Darlene Ferrin knew enough riffraff, like in her day-to-day life. You know, she associated with enough people who were right on the edge of polite society that some of those people were going to end up becoming suspects, which the Zodiac killers didn't want. What they wanted was they wanted conventional murders where they would have the option afterward to either claim the murder or not claim the murder, depending on what was seen. And as I said, if more than one Zodiac killer had been seen, maybe if they were aware of what was in the police reports, where both James Owen and or not James Owen, but William Crow and Stan, the 14-year-old, or at least originally said that they saw more than one person inside the Chevy Impala, that maybe they wouldn't have claimed the Lake Herman Road murders, because that would then suggest that that there was more than one Zodiac killer. What they wanted to present to the public was that this was one guy running amok. So, and there weren't two people involved. If Stella Medeiros had driven by a minute earlier and seen the Zodiac killers, then they wouldn't have seen them. If she had seen the actual murders taking place and then accelerated, down the road, they would not have claimed the murders, and I assume the murders would have been considered maybe a drug murders where you had a case of mistaken identity, where some drug dealer pulled in expecting to meet somebody else, and there were these two innocent teenagers there, and they ended up dead inadvertently, as I said, because of a problem with their mistaken identity. So anyway, you have so what happens with at Blue Rock Springs Park is that you have a relatively low priority victim in Darlene Ferrin, somebody that they don't want, would prefer not to kill. They would prefer to kill somebody who doesn't know a lot of riffraff. But Darlene's the only one who's available, and they need to kill somebody on July 4th. Now, what's the reason for this? If you look at the opening line of the solution to Z408, it says, "I like killing people." The phrase "killing people," if you decode the words "killing people" by alphabet numbers, killing is 74. It's 11 plus 9, which is 20, plus K is 11, I is 9, that's 20. L is the 12th letter, that's 32. L is the 12th letter, that's 44. I is the 9th letter, that's 53. N is the 14th letter, that's 67. And G is the 7th letter. So killing adds up to 74. People is, P is the 16th letter. E is the 5th letter, so that's 21. O is the 15th letter, so that's 36. P is the 16th letter, so that's 50. 51. L is the 12th letter, that's 63. And E is the 5th letter, so that's what is that? 69. No, I'm sorry. It's 16 plus 5, which is 21, plus 15, which is 36, plus 16, which is 52, plus 14, which is it's still wrong. Okay. It's people. It's 16th letter P. It's 16 plus 5, 21, plus O, which is the 15th letter, which is 36, plus P, which is the 16th letter, which is 52, plus L, which is the 12th letter, which is 64, plus E, which is the 5th letter, which is 69. So you have killing, which is 74 by alphabet numbers, and people, which is 69 by alphabet letters. So the phrase, I like killing people, the phrase killing people is 7469. So it's 7469, okay? July 4th, 1969. So the Zodiacs, as part of their puzzle, wanted to be killing people on 7469, okay? So it was very important that they actually kill somebody on that date, okay? So they needed to have a victim before the day came to an end, and Darlene Ferrin was available. So they went with Darlene Ferrin, even though she was not the ideal victim. And here's another issue that Mike Butterfield has raised, which is not does not make any sense. If you look at the "This Is the Zodiac Speaking" documentary on the David Fincher director's cut DVD, and obviously it's available on YouTube as well, and you watch the interview with Michael Magoo, you will note that Magoo says that they were chased that night. They were chased big time that night by the car that was trailing them. And the interviewer says, "Well, you didn't tell the police that, did you?" And he says, "I didn't, but we were chased big time by the guy." In other words, they were essentially chased towards the Blue Rock Springs parking lot. Now, my guess is that the Zodiac killers knew already from previous surveillance that Darlene Ferrin liked to hang out in that area. She liked to drive to that parking lot. So they were just like being suggestive, with the way they were driving. By the way, we know that this is true because if you look at the Robert Graysmith book, his initial book Zodiac, when the murder is described, and I'm assuming obviously the only living witness was Michael Magoo, so I'm assuming Michael Magoo talked to Robert Graysmith before Graysmith wrote his book. That's what they described. What is described is the car chasing the Darlene Ferrin Corvair through the streets and eventually toward the Blue Rock Springs parking lot. So they were in fact chased there by the killer, and they pulled into the parking lot at Blue Rock Springs Park, and the car that had been chasing them pulled up behind them and waited there for a moment or two, and then backed out and left the lot. Okay, and they were under the impression that the person had gone away. But then, and if you watch the movie, essentially they have the same car coming back, and then the guy getting out and shooting them. So the question is, what happened? Well, what happened was midnight struck. The clock struck 12. I believe what actually happened was the Zodiacs realized after the events of, particularly after the events of Lake Herman Road, the murder in Riverside was relatively uneventful. But on Lake Herman Road, there were several times when the Zodiacs were almost discovered, where the fact that multiple people were involved, and as I said, William Crow originally said that he saw two Caucasians inside the car. Stan, the 14-year-old, said that he saw two people inside the the Impala that pulled off Lake Herman Road. So two people were seen by witnesses on the road. Okay, so at some point the Zodiacs decided that it was dangerous for two of them or three of them to be moving around at a crime scene because they might be spotted by a witness, and if that happened, they would then have to, just toss the murder and not claim it afterwards. Might commit the murder, but they would be forced into a situation. By the way, I'm wearing I meant to mention this. I'm wearing the Z340 T-shirt that I think I bought from Tom Voigt. These are pretty cool actually because it's relatively subtle. There's nothing blatant about it. Unfortunately, Dave Aranchik has made this shirt obsolete. So Dave needs to send me whatever I paid for this shirt. Dave needs to send me that money. I'm sure he's made several $1 million now from having solved having deciphered Z340. The thing that I don't understand is, well, I'll get to this when I eventually do my Dave Aranchik video. I will get to this, but I just find it really strange that he gets thousands of views for episodes 1 through 4. Episode 5 suddenly gets like 2 million views. And then wouldn't you think that the next episode afterward would at least get, I don't know, 1 million? But no, for episode 6, he's right back down to where he was for episode 4. So I don't know if that means that people have short attention spans or what, but I just thought it was weird. Anyway, to get back into the into what was going on in Blue Rock Springs Park, I believe that the Zodiac killers were kind of freaked out by the fact that they came so close to that there was more traffic on Lake Herman Road than they expected that night, and they were almost discovered. People they were almost seen by people, and as I said, I think they waited and they carefully read every newspaper account that they could get their hands on afterwards to make absolutely sure that the illusion of the single Zodiac killer was still available to them, because if more than one person had been seen and that had been accepted as what happened, if Stella Medeiros drives past the turnout while the murders are taking place and says, "I saw two people, killing the two teenagers," then that would have been the consensus view of the murders, and the Zodiacs would not have claimed that murder, in my opinion. So I think what they did at Blue Rock Springs Park to change things and to make it like a little bit safer to operate was that they had Michael O'Hare driving around by himself in his own car, but that let's say Gareth Penn and you, Penn, were within a block or so of where he was. And he was instructed to, follow Darlene, and Darlene went to Michael Magoo's house, picked him up. Then Michael did the same thing that maybe he did on Lake Herman Road, where he chased William Crow and began chasing Darlene. And fortunately for them, I guess, Darlene went where the Zodiacs thought she might go, which was into Blue Rock Springs Park and into the parking lot. And then they had another victim who was on the north leg of the Radiant. Now, the problem was Michael O'Hare pulls into the parking lot and he's about to get out and shoot the victims. And he looks at his watch, and maybe it was a Black Banded Timex, I don't know. But he looks at his watch and he notices that it's at the clock. The clock has struck 12, and it is now July 5th. So now the Zodiacs cannot claim to have been killing people on 7469 because it's not 7469 anymore. They chose Darlene because she was the only one available, and she was available very late in the day at whatever 11:45 p.m. that night. Michael O'Hare chases them into Blue Rock Springs Park. He is all set to get out of his car. He looks at his watch, and it's after midnight. Now it's July 5th. Now if he kills them, he will not be killing people on 7469. Okay, so Michael O'Hare assumes that the appointment with Death for Darlene has been canceled. So he backs out of the lot and drives to where the other Zodiacs are, maybe a block or so away. And I'm guessing that maybe you, Penn, countermanded Michael's orders and said something like, okay, it's after midnight, but all we'll do is we'll insist that the murder took place on July 4th in our letters. And I don't think people will look very carefully at exactly when the murder took place. So it's all good. So then Michael O'Hare turns around, drives back to the parking lot in Blue Rock Springs Park, gets out of his car, and walks up and starts shooting. Okay, so if you're wondering why the car backed out again, that's why. It's because suddenly the date changed, and they no longer had the possibility of killing a victim, killing Darlene specifically on July 4th. And if you look at all the Zodiac correspondence, you will notice that it says 4th of July. Okay, well, the cryptogram cover letters also say last Christmas. Well, December 20th isn't, I mean, it's a nitpick maybe, but December 20th is not Christmas. It's 5 days before Christmas. So the whole notion of, for example, that, well, the Mount Diablo radian isn't an exact radian. It's 2 or 3, depending on how you look at it, it's 2 or 3 degrees off. But if you're allowed to move the entire angle to the right on the map, then it's only 1 or 2 degrees off. Okay, it's only 2 or 3 degrees off if you're keeping the south leg exactly where it is. Okay, at which point the question would be: are you trying to create a just any radian, or a radian that goes through the intersection at Washington and Cherry, which coincidentally, that line from Mount Diablo to through Washington and Cherry, before it gets to Washington and Cherry, it goes through BM 54 at 739 Clay Street, which is, as I said, which is the location for the buried body of Donna Lass. So that going into the project, they knew that the south leg of the radian was immobile. They had to leave the south leg of the radian where it was, and they could maybe fudge a little bit where the north leg was. And again, if the killers murder victims on the exact line of the radian, it means they would have had to murder them in fields or on highways, which would not make any sense. By fudging the north leg a little bit, they are able to kill victims in a very prominent Lover's Lane, the gate number 10 turnout, and another one in the Blue Rock Springs park parking lot. Okay, so it just made practical sense to for the north leg of the radiant to be off by a degree or two. Mike Butterfield for 10 years thought that much of a variation was okay, and then suddenly did an about face and said it wasn't. The fact of the matter is that the radiant that is created by the Blue Rock Springs parking lot, the gate number 10 turnout on Lake Herman Road, and the phone booth at Springs and Tuolumne, from which the Zodiac killer made the call to Nancy Slover, that is a perfect radiant. Okay, and you can see that on the Case Reopened broadcast, which also has Mike from March of 1999, which also has Mike Butterfield demonstrating the Mount Diablo radiant. Okay, so my throat is very dry for some reason tonight. I don't know why. Anyway, so Michael O'Hare pulls into the parking lot at Blue Rock Springs Park, and he goes walking up to the Darlene Ferrin's Corvair. Now, here's the question: how does he miss Michael O'Hare with a shot? Okay. He walks up to he's carrying the lantern light. He gets out of his car. He, I guess, walks around their car, walks up to the passenger side of the car. He's got a gun. Michael Magoo doesn't suspect anything weird. He thinks that the intruder is a cop. They had already pulled out their ID. So how is it that that the Zodiac killer somehow fails to shoot Michael Magoo in the side of the head? He was able to, without any problems, shoot David Faraday on the left side of his head. He is able to shoot Paul Stein in the cab on the right side of his head. When he's got Michael Magoo as a sitting duck in Darlene's Corvair, and just sitting there. All he has to do is take the gun, stick it up against the side of his head, boom, and kill him with one shot. Why doesn't that happen? And the answer to that is the Zodiac was not shooting at Michael Magoo initially. He goes up to the side of the car, to the passenger window of the car. Instead of shooting at Michael, he fires the first shot, or the first couple of shots, at Darlene. Now, why does he do this? He does it for two reasons. Number one, Darlene is the main target for the crime, not Michael. The second reason is that Darlene's the driver. So in that situation, just in tactical terms, you would want to take out the driver first and then take out the passenger. The passenger can't do anything to get away, okay? What Michael O'Hare didn't allow for is the possibility that Michael Magoo would be a lot of Michaels in this case for some reason. I don't know why. And Mike Rodelli too. Let's not forget about him. Okay, but anyway, there's only one shell in the case though, although they're shell casings. So anyway, he doesn't allow for the possibility that Michael Magoo might actually jump into the back seat somehow. Now, how he's able to do that, I don't know, but he manages to get out of the way of the shot. No, he does get shot through his tongue at some point, but there's no doubt in my mind that if Michael Magoo had been the original target as the Zodiac killer, as Michael O'Hare is walking towards the Corvair, he'd have been killed. He'd have been shot through the head. But the Zodiac, the gunman, is initially firing at Darlene. So he fires past Michael's head to shoot Darlene maybe a couple of times. By the time he turns the gun on Michael Magoo, Magoo is like jumped into the back seat, or is on his way into the back seat. And as the Zodiac killer says in his letter, thus spoiling my aim. Okay, There isn't any doubt, however, that the intent on the Zodiac killer's part was to kill both victims. Um, uh, if you look at Robert Graysmith's book, where he talks about Ed Rust coming out to the crime scene after the murder takes place, and he looks into the car, and he sees that there are two shell casings on the right rear floorboard. Uh, all of the other shell casings were outside the car, to the right of the passenger door, but there are two shell casings inside the car on the right rear floorboard. Now the question is, how did this happen? Well, the only way it could happen if you're firing a 9mm at somebody in the back seat of the car is you thrust the gun into the car. When you thrust the gun into the car, the shell casings, instead of flipping out and falling on the ground, flip out inside the car and land in the car. And as a result of that, we know that two things. We know that the killer thrust his gun into the car to shoot at Michael. So he was doing everything he possibly could to kill Michael. He was still firing at Michael with the last two shots. Here's the question. How do we know that those are the last two shots that he fired? We know that because there were only two shell casings in the right rear floorboard. If the killer had, after firing at Michael Magoo twice, had then turned and fired again at Darlene, that shell casing for that shot and any subsequent shots would also have been inside the car. And they weren't. All of the shots that he fired at Darlene, the shell casings are outside the car. So he never actually thrusts the gun into the car when he's firing at Darlene. He only does it when he's firing at Michael Magoo. Now, here's the question. Why is this significant? It's significant. Here's a, before we even get to that. Did the Zodiac killer walk away from the car and go back to his own car and then hear Michael groaning and then walk back to the car and start firing again? No. What actually happened was, I believe, this is my interpretation, but it's what makes sense, is that after Michael Magoo, he's firing at Michael Magoo. Magoo jumps into the back seat of the car. After this happens, the Zodiac killer takes a step back from the window and kind of reevaluates the situation in tactical terms. What's going on? Okay, he's in the back seat. Okay, I'm going to have to stick my gun in there to fire at him again. Okay, so what ended up happening was Michael Magoo is on the floor in the back seat of the car, and he looks up and notices that the killer's face is no longer framed by the passenger side window. And the reason for that is the Zodiac killer took a step back, reevaluated the situation, and then stepped forward again and started firing at him. I think that's I believe Michael Magoo when he says that his car was that Darlene's car was chased by the killer. I tend to believe that he's wrong about that the killer stepped away from his car. I don't think that happened. I think what probably happened is that he stepped back and was no longer framed by the passenger side window, and as a result of that, Magoo was under the impression that he had gone back to his own car, but I don't think he did. I think he just stepped back for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 seconds and said, okay, I'm going to have to stick my gun into the car. So the significance of the shell casings on the right rear floorboard is that the Zodiac killer was trying his best to kill Michael Magoo. Okay. Having said that, he stopped firing at him. Michael Magoo was still moving around after the 9th shot. The killer fired 10 shots at Lake Herman Road when he only had to fire 6. He shot David Faraday with one, shot 5 into Betty Lou Jensen. That's 6. I believe the 2 shots into the car came after the teenagers were murdered. That's 8. And then they fired 2 more shots into the air, so that the number of shots would add up to 10. Because I think the intent of the Zodiac killers was to have fired 20 shots and made 17 stab wounds at Lake Berryessa. So that the number of shots was predetermined. It was 10 shots at Lake Herman Road. It was 9 shots at Blue Rock Springs Park, and only 1 shot in Presidio Heights. Only 1 shot was fired into Paul Stein's head. Okay, so all of that was predetermined, and that's actually the solution to this. The solution to Z340 is by gun, the vertical component of the cipher grid is 20 rows. It's 20 shots were fired by gun. The horizontal component is 17 columns. Okay, 17 stab wounds. It's what the Zodiac killer wrote on the Brian Hartnell's door: by knife, horizontally. Okay, by gun is vertical. So that's the whole point of Z340, is that the message is in the format of the cipher grid. And what the message is that the crimes were staged. They were orchestrated ahead of time. The Zodiac killers knew exactly how many shots they were going to fire at Lake Herman Road, at Blue Rock Springs Park, and at Presidio Heights. The Zodiac killer knew exactly how many times he was going to stab the victims at Lake Berryessa. 7 times for the, 7 times for the male, 10 times for the female, as it worked out. That's exactly what the hospital said. That the number of times that they had been stabbed. I will get to that when I talk about Lake Berryessa, but the Napa Register said 10 stab wounds and 7 stab wounds, not 6, as Brian Hartnell had said. And Brian Hartnell said, I was stabbed, I think, 6 times. And then Mike Butterfield on the Peacock documentary says Brian Hartnell was stabbed approximately 6 times, which I got a good laugh out of. But that's as close to a concession as Mike Butterfield ever comes. Okay, I will discuss that in greater detail when I talk about Lake Berryessa. In the case of Blue Rock Springs Park, the Zodiac killer shoves his gun into the rear seat of Darlene Ferrin's Corvair, fires 2 more times, leaves 2 shell casings on the right rear floorboard. Does not manage to kill Michael Magoo. Magoo is still moving around. Magoo ends up pushing the door open and falling out onto the gravel of the parking lot. Michael O'Hare, the Zodiac killer, had to be aware of the fact that Michael Magoo wasn't dead. Okay, so why didn't he keep firing at him? Well, he didn't keep firing at him, presumably, because he had taken a clip, a 9mm gun, with a clip that had 9 bullets in it. And by the time he fired the 9th shot, Michael Magoo, even though he had a shot through his tongue, he had been shot in the head, but not fatally. He couldn't fire any more shots at him. As I said, my guess is that the clip that he took with him, which is another reason I believe he didn't walk back to his car. There wouldn't have been any reason to try and reload. And here's the other question. If you honestly believe that the Zodiac killer was shooting at Darlene Ferrin and shooting at Michael Magoo, and then stopped, walked back to his car, heard Magoo groaning, reloaded his pistol and came back, that would mean that he ended up firing 4 or 5 shots the first time, and then another 4 when he came back to his car. why would he only be taking a clip that had 4 or 5 bullets in it? I think I don't have an automatic pistol, but I think you can get one that fires like 13 or 4. I think you can get a clip that has, or maybe more bullets, but at least I think 13 bullets, and then you can have like a 14th bullet in the chamber or something like that. Where's Scott Bullock when I need him? Okay, Scott, uh, let me see your input down in the comment section below. But anyway, the Zodiac killer ran out of bullets. That's why Michael Magoo is still alive. Okay, that's the reason. It wasn't that he was some kind of robot and said, "Oops, I have to get back in my car and drive away from here." He made absolutely sure that Betty Lou Jensen was dead and that David Faraday was dead. And he had Michael Magoo dead to rights, but he stopped firing at him. And he gets back into his car and drives away. And my guess is that he rendezvoused with the other Zodiac killers, and they said, "Okay, yeah, that sounds right." The murder would have taken place, I don't know, maybe 12:10 a.m., maybe shortly before that, because I think some teenagers came by in the parking lot, maybe around 12:10 or so maybe 12:05, 12:06, something like that. But the murder definitely took place after midnight. So, and as I said, the call to Nancy Slover took place from a phone booth, which if you uh, create an angle on the map with the sites of Blue Rock Springs Park murder sites and the gate number 10 turnout on Lake Herman Road with that telephone booth, what you get is an exact radian. Okay, so he was drawing a radian, not necessarily with the Mount Diablo radian, although the Mount Diablo radian is approximated. Okay, so basically, what we have in Blue Rock Springs Park is, to reiterate here, is we have a victim who was a lower priority, who the Zodiac killers didn't want to choose, was on their list, but didn't want to have to use, but they ended up having to use her because she was available on the specific date that they wanted to use her, which was July 4th. Although they didn't quite make it, they were able to shoot Darlene Ferrin. Obviously, if they had shot her at 1 a.m., everyone would have known that she was shot on July 5th. Since Darlene was shot maybe 12:05 a.m., something like that, the general public would not have been aware that she wasn't killed on July 4th. And there might not have been as much of a reason for David Fincher to open his movie with fireworks and Darlene driving down David Street in Vallejo and picking him up. Okay, so and the fireworks in the Blue Rock Springs parking lot, which I wasn't aware that actually happened, but it does happen in the movie. So I don't know, but basically what you have in Blue Rock Springs Park is you have a secondary victim. You have Darlene Ferrin, who was not who the Zodiac killers wanted to kill, because that was going to create suspects, and that's what ended up happening. If you read the original Robert Graysmith book Zodiac, you will note that he writes I don't know what the first 6 or 7 pages, or maybe the first dozen pages or so, are about Lake Herman Road, and then the next 50 pages are about everybody that Darlene Ferrin knows. Okay, which was not the idea. The idea was to create conventional murders so that if the Zodiac killers ended up not claiming those murders, they wouldn't be suspected as being necessarily as being Zodiac murders. And then claiming those murders and connecting for example, the two Vallejo murders to the Paul Stein murder. So that was the idea, and Darlene was, as I said, she was not the ideal victim. If they had someone with a low profile, or a lower profile, somebody more along the lines of a David Faraday or Paul Stein or Shepard and Hartnell, then there isn't any suspicion that they were murdered by somebody else. Then when the Zodiac killers claim them as victims, there aren't suspects that can be can be suspected of being the Zodiac killer. In the meantime, because Darlene Ferrin was because of her availability was ultimately chosen as the Zodiac victim. You have all this stuff that Robert Graysmith is talking about. You have all of her family members coming forward and giving information about Darlene's whereabouts and where she had gone and who she knew and so forth. Which, if you look at the other Zodiac events, you don't see. You don't see. I've never seen any quotes from Michael Bates about Sherry. I saw quotes from Joseph Bates about her, but nothing from her brother. I mean, you see quotes of family members in the Lake Herman Road murders, and to some, well, not really very much for not really anything for Lake Berryessa. There isn't a lot of information about Paul Stein and who he knew and who he didn't. There is with Darlene, because she knew a lot of people, and she knew she was, relatively speaking, a street person, and apparently had a lot of boyfriends. Okay, so I mean, that wasn't the idea. That's not what the Zodiac murders were set up to do. So let me see if I can if I can summarize what I've talked about here. The Blue Rock Springs Park murder was intended to be the second homicide on the north leg of the Mount Diablo Radian, and ultimately you would have two victims on the south leg, Paul Stein and Donna Lass. In the case of Donna Lass, her body would be located at approximately where BM-54 is, a USGS benchmark on the south leg of the Radian. Okay, but symmetry, which is the main design element of the Zodiac project, dictated that they apparently that they had to have two victims. They had two mirror image victims, same initials. They're both on the north leg of the Mount Diablo Radian. They were both making the same point. Darlene Ferrin's name and David Faraday's name both contain the word Easter in Redivided Morse. The reason for that is one of the literary things that the Zodiacs were basing their project on was Dante's Inferno. Dante's Inferno is about a trip through hell, and the poem actually begins on Holy Thursday, but Dante and Virgil enter hell on Good Friday, and they come up out of hell on Easter Sunday, so that the finished product of the poem of Dante's Inferno is Easter Sunday. It's Easter. So the finished product, the idea being the finished product of the Zodiac killers would be would have the word Easter inside their names, and both Darlene Ferrin and David Faraday have that word inside their names. Now, Dave Aranchek's going to come back and say, well, the word Easter can be found in a lot of names. Yes, but it is only found, I believe, something like 1 out of every 50 names, something along those lines. When I was doing the list from the Graysmith book of possible Zodiac victims who are not suspected of being Zodiac victims, and I think he lists like 49 names or something like that, and only one of them had the word Easter inside her name. So I don't know what the exact numbers of that would be. Maybe it's only 1 out of 25, but it's not common at all. So you had two victims who both had the word Easter inside their names and had the same initials. They were both driving their cars, and the cars were registered to other people. David's car was registered to his mother. Darlene's car was registered to her father-in-law. Okay, so you do have symmetry in the two Vallejo murders. So, but anyway, the Darlene Ferrin murder was essentially a mirage, conceptually, a mirror image crime to the Lake Herman Road murders. So I think that's about what I have to offhand that I can think of that I have to talk about Lake Herman Road or about Blue Rock Springs Park. I don't think most of the whereabouts of the victims and so forth, since we have a surviving victim. I don't really need to go into that. I don't really need to do a timeline of it because I think Michael Magoo has already talked about what they were doing that night and why they were doing it. This whole idea that Thomas Horan has, I mean, of many ridiculous ideas, one of the ridiculous ideas that Thomas Horan had was that Darlene Ferrin and Michael Magoo were police informants, okay? And the intent was to set up a sting and some sort of a drug deal. You would have to wonder why. Since Darlene Ferrin only had 13 cents on her and there weren't any drugs found in the car, how the police would set her up. You know, if I were a police detective and I'm setting up a sting, then I give a decent amount. I mean, at the very least, $5 for a nickel bag of what was called back then. And I never smoked marijuana myself, but my friends told me that the cheapest amount of marijuana that you could get was called a nickel bag. This is like 1968, 69. A nickel bag would have been $5 from a dealer. It's usually a friend of yours, I guess. So the informant angle doesn't make any sense at all, but very little of what Horan says does make sense. Okay, so that's it as far as I can recall for Blue Rock Springs Park. I will come back in the not too distant future. Hopefully, I hope my voice is better off than it was tonight, and talk about Lake Berryessa, and eventually talk about Presidio Heights. So if anyone has any questions or comments and they want to leave it, let me see if I can find the here we go, and want to discuss how long. Oh man. Yeah, I talked longer than I thought I did. Yeah, so I mean, if anyone has questions or comments, I will be happy to address those in the next video. And as always, thanks for watching. And Ned DeHaan told me that that my the interview that I did with him will be going up, I believe, next Friday. So this is Friday, November 10th, so I assume he meant maybe like Friday, November 17th, that the video, and it will go up in segments, not all in one, because the interview itself was 3 hours. So I'll probably be doing like more videos before that happens. So, but anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I will talk to you soon.